In this video, I'm going to share with you 8 tips that have had a serious impact on my drone photography. And these are guidelines that you can follow even if you're a beginner or if you've already been flying for a while. And if you follow this advice, I guarantee you that the next time you take your drone out, you will end up with much better results and not with a photo like this one, for example. Because honestly, what are your first thoughts when you see this photo? Probably no woes or interesting, right? I'm guessing more like a meh. Well, that's because this photo lacks thought and composition. And that's one of the most important things with drone photography, if not with photography in general, is to think about your composition. But when flying a drone, you often forget to look for a good composition. I know I've been guilty of that many times, and especially when I was quite new to drone flying. You just get a little bit nervous and excited when you have such an expensive piece of gear flying around, and you forget to think about where do I place certain elements in my frame, or how do I find balance in my photo? Because drone cameras have a wide angle lens, they capture a lot of the landscape, and it can be a little bit difficult to give all of that information a logical place in your photo. So I find it really handy to have the rule of thirds grid on my screen. It'll help me to place certain elements in the photo, and it also works as a reference when I'm looking for a composition. This photo, for example, captures a lot of the landscape, and even though it's a very impressive landscape with all the lakes in there, your eye just gets a little bit lost and it doesn't really know where to focus on. A better photo of the landscape would be this one right here, for example. It just has a bit more balance and focus of what to look at. Or maybe even better, I think, is this one right here, where the little river leads you into the first lake and further towards the lakes in the back and finally into the mountains. So all the elements in this photo work together to lead the viewer through the image. And that tends to make for a more interesting photo. You should really take that unique perspective of being in the air to your advantage, because a great way of finding compositions is to look for symmetry or patterns in the landscape. And actually, this symmetry or these patterns are often only revealed when you have that bird's eye view. Like the patterns created by these fields. You wouldn't really see this when you're standing on the ground, but from up high they create a beautiful and more abstract image. Or the unique shapes of this lake, which create a very interesting image from this top-down view. And I'll show you some more examples of this style of drone shots later in the video when I share another very important tip. But first, let's talk about another very strong compositional technique, and that's the use of leading lines. Leading lines will literally lead the viewer through your image. And it's very practical for drone photography because, again, often these leading lines are only revealed when you're up high. Just think about things like roads or bridges or rivers. They can become a very strong leading line when seen from above. Just make sure that the leading line in your image makes sense so that it doesn't lead the viewer out of the frame, but more into the photo or into the distant landscape. Okay, so this next one is the only gear related tip, but I think it's so incredibly important that I really wanted to share it with you guys. So maybe some of you are gonna agree with me on this one, but I used to think that filters for drones were totally unnecessary, overrated, and just another marketing scheme to feed everyone's gas. But that was until I actually got some and really noticed a remarkable difference. Now, the ND part of these filters doesn't really matter that much when it comes to photography, but the polarization actually does affect the image quality quite a lot. So a polarizer removes or reduces glare and reflections, and it also helps to capture the full depth of color by removing that glare. If you're shooting landscapes with water involved, the sun reflecting on the surface of the water can be quite distracting. But with a polarizing filter, that reflection is minimized and you get a much cleaner image. And even without water in the scene, a polarizer just creates more contrast and makes the colors pop a little more. On top of that, polarizers also reduce something called atmospheric haze. And this is especially handy for drone photography, because you know how sometimes these elements in the far distance look a little bit hazy? Well, with a polarizer on your drone's lens, that haze is strongly reduced, resulting in a cleaner and crispier image. I'm using these Polar Pro filters for my Mavic 2 Pro, and I think they work great. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check those out. Now, something that has really changed my approach to drone photography is to look at my drone as an extra lens or an extra tool in my camera bag. Just as you would use a telephoto lens or a wide-angle lens to achieve a certain type of photo, your drone can get you a different type of photo of the same scene. And I don't necessarily mean the obvious aerial photo where the drone is flying 200 meters high, half a kilometer away. No, I'm more talking about shooting not so droney locations with a drone. So think about your drone as an extra high tripod. Try and think about, what would this look like if I would photograph it from a slightly higher perspective? Or what would it look like if I would photograph it from this certain angle that I can't actually reach? Do you know what I mean? This photo right here would have looked completely different if taken with my normal camera and standing at the same level as the kids playing basketball. Or in this location, I took this photo with my camera from a slightly higher spot, but I thought taking this with my drone made things a little bit more interesting. And that actually brings me to my next point, which is something that both of these photos have in common. Can you guess what it is? Let me give you a bit of a clue. Okay, so has this ever happened to you? You're in this beautiful landscape, so you decide to send your drone up in the air and you start firing away because it's just such a beautiful place and you're thinking you must get some good photos, right? But you end up with a bunch of photos that don't really tell the story that you want to express, and they don't really reflect the experience that you had. They're just a bunch of photos with nothing really going on. And it's most likely because they're lacking a strong subject. It's important to think about what you are photographing and what you want the viewer to feel when they are viewing your photo. Because a drone photo of a landscape is nice, but it's not necessarily a good photo, or definitely not a great photo. If you look at this photo, for example, you can see it's a pretty interesting landscape, but there's nothing really that draws you into the photo or that tells more of a story of this landscape. There are some very obvious subjects that make it very clear what the photo is about. Here it's clear that we're looking at the building on the island in the lake. Or here we're looking at this interesting tower sticking out of the forest. So before you send your drone in the air, make sure you think of a good subject and how you can best place it in your frame. Because a strong subject is going to help make sense of your photo, it'll tell the story and the viewer will get drawn into your image, as opposed to when the viewer doesn't really know what they're supposed to look at or what's going on. These are a few examples of less obvious subjects. Of course, the main subject in this photo is the bridge, but the train on the bridge really tells the story of this photo. If we look at it without the train, I think you will agree that it's less interesting. Or this one here, the car again helps to tell the story of this photo. Without it, it's not a bad photo by any means, but the red car adds more perspective and story to the shot. One thing you could do before you arrive at your location is have a look on Google Earth and see what subjects might look cool from that drone perspective. And some photos might even require some more planning. Like that photo of the train on the bridge in Slovenia, I had to look up the train schedule and make sure that my drone was in the air with the composition sorted, ready to take the shot when that train passes by. And you might be thinking right now, well, what if I don't have a subject to add perspective or a story to my photo? That brings me to my next point, and that is creating your own subject. In some photos, adding a human element to the frame gives that photo more context. And it can be helpful to highlight things like the size of a landscape, or it can help give direction to a photo when the person is walking through the frame. Just make sure that the person is walking in the right direction. You don't want them walking out of the frame because that will take the viewer's eye away from the photo. Putting a person in your shot is something that I think can help viewers relate to a photo, and perhaps they start to imagine what it would be like if they were in that landscape. So I started off talking about composition because it's the number one thing that will make or break your drone photography. And great compositions can be achieved with one of the most unique and fascinating perspectives that your drone has to offer, and that is the top-down shot. Now, I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with this type of shot, but I think so many people forget about it when flying their drone, myself included. The top-down perspective is great for creating more abstract compositions and playing with patterns and textures that you can find in the landscape. You might have your drone up to take a completely different kind of photo and never even thought about tilting the camera down and seeing what interesting shots are uncovered. So remember, when you have your drone in flight anyway, it only takes one move to tilt the camera down and see what's there, because you might end up with some beautiful, unexpected images. One thing I'm sure we all love about drones is their ability to capture so much of the landscape, and especially with those wide-angle lenses. But in some situations, the landscape or subject you're trying to photograph is simply too big to fit in the frame, and even that wide-angle lens is not wide enough. But that's where the pano modes come in very handy. They are such an incredible tool in drone applications, and if you aren't using these, then you're really missing out on some great opportunities. They basically allow you to take an even more wide-angle shot and capture more of the landscape by taking a sequence of photos that can easily be stitched together in post-processing. These panoramas are especially useful when you want to emphasize the size of your subject or show it in its full environment. An extra bonus with these panos is that they are really high resolution, so you end up with a very high quality image, and you can even crop in on that image, readjust your composition, and improve your final result. So I suggest next time you fly your drone, you grab some panos. Okay, my next advice might sound a little bit weird, but it's don't fly too high and don't fly too low. So just fly in the middle? What I mean by that is that you should try to avoid to only take photos at a certain altitude, because sometimes when you're flying your drone, you kind of get fixated on that one shot and you forget to maybe think about what it might look like if you fly a little bit higher or fly a little bit lower. Or something that I've caught myself doing a lot is only flying really, really high and only taking photos from that altitude, because that's what the drone's for, right? Even a few meters of altitude will make a huge difference in your photo. This shot, for example, would be completely different if taken from a higher elevation. The river would become smaller in the frame, and it wouldn't be such an impactful part of the composition. Or in this photo, if I would have had the drone at a lower altitude, the mountains in the background and that second lake in the background there would not have been revealed, and the shot would be completely different. Or these two photos taken at exactly the same spot, only at different altitudes, perfectly shows what a huge difference altitude can make. So now that you're prepared to take better photos the next time you fly your drone, you want to make sure that you know how to edit these photos and create some serious bangers. And this video right here is going to show you just how to do that. Thanks a lot for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you aren't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!